All right, get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming for today's presentation, Fireflies in Focus. My name's Caitlin, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before I introduce today's speaker, there's a few housekeeping things to go over. Your cameras will remain off and you'll be muted throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A section, and then we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. This presentation will be recorded and will be uploaded to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page within the next couple of weeks. So if you miss any part of today's presentation or would like to revisit it or share it with somebody else, you can find it there. And after the presentation, we'll also have a very brief survey. It should take less than a minute to complete. It's really short, but the survey helps support programming like this one, so we appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. And if anyone is in attendance is interested in speaking with a Conservation Nebraska member regarding conservation issues in Nebraska, or just to find out more about what we do, I will put our email in the chat. But for today's presentation, we have Kait Chapman, an extension educator of urban entomology with Nebraska Extension, to talk to us about fireflies today. So I will let her take it away.
Thank you, Caitlin. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're joining for this virtual program about one of arguably the coolest insects in nature, right? Fireflies. So before we really get started and delve deep into fireflies, I want you to take a moment, go into the chat, and let me know what you call these insects. We hear fireflies, we hear lightning bugs, maybe you call them something else. And then maybe drop where you're located also. So if you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, you can say Lincoln. I just think it's kind of interesting to see how these different locations may influence the different names that we call fireflies. So I'll give you a second to do that. And a lot of it is like really interchangeable too. Like maybe it's Monday and I want to call them fireflies, and then maybe it's Friday and they're lightning bugs. We'll see. But awesome. So I see fireflies, lightning bugs, rural southeast Nebraska. Awesome. Firefly, lightning bugs. Yeah, so those are the two most common things that we call them. Fireflies and lightning bugs, right? And this is what they look like. I hope all of you have seen fireflies. We're going to talk about firefly conservation later because we are seeing a decline in numbers. But I just want to kind of dig into these names. And so when we say fireflies and we say lightning bugs, they're a little bit of a misnomer. And I'm going to point this out simply because I am an entomologist and maybe I'm a little bit picky when it comes to names. But when I think of fireflies, I think of a fly on fire. And when I think lightning bugs, I think of a stink bug with a lightning bolt on its back. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because fireflies are actually not flies. They're actually not bugs. So I often call them lightning beetles. And so fireflies and lightning bugs is totally acceptable. Anybody can use them. But in my mind as an entomologist, they are lightning beetles. And all of these fireflies belong into a single family that's called Lampyridae. Kind of easy to remember because the name starts with lamp, and we know that they light up like a light bulb. And so this is what makes fireflies so fascinating, is their ability to create light and communicate with each other through that light as well. All right, so moving on, we're going to focus on fireflies. As Caitlin said, my name is Kait Chapman. I'm with Nebraska Extension, and I'm what you consider an urban entomologist. So a lot of my focus is on bugs that are found indoors or around cities, other things that really kind of the creepy crawly side like ticks. But then we also talk about fun things and things that are beneficial to the environment and the ecosystem, such as fireflies. And so when I call them lightning beetles, beetles are their own group of insects, and they are the most diverse group of animals in the world. I believe it was 1 in every 4 species is a species of beetle. So they're incredibly diverse, but they do have things that unite them all in this one group. All beetles have chewing mouth parts. It could be a Japanese beetle that feeds on leaves. Everyone's probably a little familiar with the Japanese beetle. Or it could be a ladybug or a lady beetle that are predatory on other insects like aphids. But they all use that chewing mouth part, including fireflies, to eat. All beetles also have what we call elytra forewings. And so they have 2 pairs of wings, and then that outer pair is kind of hardened. Fireflies tend to be on the softer side of that hard elytra, but once again, it's something that unites all beetles. And most beetles will have legs that are adapted just for walking or for running. There are some exceptions to that, like beetles that swim in water will have different legs. Beetles that dig into the ground may have slightly different legs. But this is the group we're talking about when we delve into fireflies. So there are over 2,000 different firefly species around the entire world. They're found on every single continent except for Antarctica. And here in the United States, there's about a little over 150, maybe 160 different described species that we've identified in the US and Canada. And here in Nebraska, we get about 14 different species that have been submitted. Is everybody familiar with iNaturalist? So these are observations that you can submit to this platform. You can get pictures, and then experts will help identify it for you. So these are the 14 different species that have been identified in Nebraska on iNaturalist. So we have about a dozen, but you'll notice the number of observations. The most common species we see is the common eastern firefly, which is often called the Big Dipper firefly. And I'll get into why that is called that as well. But each different region has its own mix of species, and then each species has its own unique light or flashing pattern associated with it as well. And so when we think about firefly activities, we're actually like just getting into firefly season. We've seen a couple out there already. They peak around June and July, but right now is a great opportunity to maybe just sit on your back deck, go to a park at sunset, and just really look for the fireflies and take them in, because that is one of the best things about bugs and entomology is just observing and appreciating nature, including fireflies. So what makes them so special? Fireflies, along with some other insects, have what we call bioluminescence. And bioluminescence can occur through a chemical reaction. And on fireflies, they have this specialized organ that we appropriately call a lantern, right? So they have this head, thorax, and abdomen, and the abdomen is the one that contains that light-producing organ, or the lantern. And so how that happens is actually pretty unique and has been studied for years by scientists. But it's a chemical reaction that produces this light in the lantern. So we have a couple chemicals such as oxygen, we have luciferin, and then we have this enzyme called luciferase. And so essentially what happens is the oxygen, the luciferase, combines the oxygen and the luciferin, and you add a little bit of ATP, or a little bit of energy, into that, and then it creates this molecule called oxyluciferin, and that is what produces the light that we see in firefly lanterns. And so fireflies have this amazing ability as adults to turn it on and off, and they actually regulate that by allowing oxygen into the lantern. So if they want this chemical reaction to happen, they'll allow oxygen into it, it'll produce this light, and then they can regulate their blinking or their flashing pattern that way as well. So it's a really unique process, And it's unique because the flashes are what we consider cold light. So this is a light that has almost no heat produced or associated with it. So it's very different than what we use in our homes for light bulbs that produce heat and something like that. And so when we think about them producing light, this is what it looks like as they're creating that oxyluciferin molecule. It's kind of a mouthful, but this is what it looks like as the end product. And it's really fascinating. And if you go out at the right time of evening, at the right time of night, you're out in nature, there's healthy habitat around you. Hopefully this is the picture that you want to see, right? We want to see lots of fireflies because it's like nature's fireworks show, right? Nature's light show. And it's just something really beautiful to behold. And so then comes the question is that fireflies produce this amazing light, but really, like, why are they doing it? What's the benefit? What's the point of having these lights? And there's a couple of different reasons or ways why they produce these lights, but the primary one is to reproduce and attract mates. Let's see, there we go. So adult fireflies produce light to, one, communicate with each other and attract mates. So this is the most familiar form of communication in fireflies is during courtship, although there are other species that will utilize these lights in different ways as well. So if you see flashing lights, there's a good chance that it's those fireflies. Oh, hopefully the audio still works. I apologize. If it doesn't, please let us know. But that's the main reason why it gets produced. And what's unique about this pattern that they use for finding a mate or another member of their species is that each individual species has its own flash pattern, its own rhythm, its own timing, sometimes its own unique color as well. And so these patterns or these flashing patterns that they produce helps both the males and the females find each other. So some species will flash in large groups and they create this really amazing like synchronized display. Usually it's the males that will fly and flash, and then females tend to stay on lower vegetation. So if you see them flying around, there's a good chance it's a male. If you see them landed somewhere or lower towards the ground, there's a good chance that it could be a female as well. So the female will recognize that male's flashing, and then she'll respond to her own flash if she's interested. And so it kind of creates this visual conversation between the fireflies of the same species. And so that one species that I mentioned, the most common firefly that we have here in Nebraska, the common eastern firefly, is often called the Big Dipper firefly. And that's because this species, as they create their flashing pattern, the males will actually create kind of this J shape as it does its flashing pattern. And so we can see that in this time lapse, which is why it's called the Big Dipper firefly. So it's something really unique. And as I mentioned, each species has its different patterns. And some species of fireflies also produce defensive chemicals. They're called lucibufagins. Sorry, that's another mouthful. But very early on, there was a theory that firefly lanterns and their flashing patterns were used to deter predators and as kind of a defense mechanism, which very well may be true. But fireflies also have other defense mechanisms, such as secreting these chemicals in what we call reflexive bleeding. So it's almost like they're bleeding these chemicals out of their body. It's toxic, it doesn't taste good, so it deters predators. So these molecules are they're synthesized by what they eat in their diet. It's very similar to like the toxins that toads have on their skin. And it's, once again, like very distasteful. So if a predator tries to grab it, they will produce this toxin. But what's really interesting is that not every species of firefly is able to produce this toxin. And so they have to find other ways to defend themselves from predators. So if we go back to how those flashing patterns are really unique by species, there are some species of fireflies that will use what we call aggressive mimicry. So instead of using its own flashing pattern to find a mate, it will actually mimic a female, will actually mimic the flashing pattern of a different species of firefly to lure it in and eat it. And as they eat it, they're picking up these toxic molecules, and that is how they're able to produce it itself. It's really interesting. So we have these flashing patterns as a way to deter predators. We have the pattern as a way to communicate and find mates. And then we also have this aggressive mimicry where they're making these flashing patterns in order to lure other species in for a nice meal. I always find that really fascinating. And it's not only that adults that glow too. We also see it in firefly larvae too. So it's a little bit difficult to see in this picture. But if you look at the end of its abdomen, we also see that lantern that glows a little bit. And unlike the adults, the larvae don't produce flashing patterns. They're just kind of always a little bioluminescent. And once again, it goes back to that theory that because they don't produce flashing patterns, they're not mature enough to mate and reproduce. It's primarily for a defense mechanism. But if we turn the lights off on this picture, this is what the larvae are going to look at or look like. So if you go out to, like, let's say a state park and you're walking the trails at night, you might see these little glowing things that are on the ground, and there's a good chance that it could be a firefly larvae. And it's something that you can always take a closer look at. So fireflies undergo complete metamorphosis. And so when we think of complete metamorphosis, we often think of like the butterfly life cycle. It goes through these 4 stages. We have eggs. They hatch into caterpillars, or in the firefly, they're called larvae. Then they move into this pupa, and then they become adults, and then they start that life cycle all over again because the adults lay eggs, right? So in the egg form, the females will lay eggs primarily in moist soil or leaf litter. They require a lot of moisture to complete that life cycle. And it's really interesting because the eggs can emit a faint glow themselves too. It's pretty faint from what I've seen. I've only seen them in pictures, but it does have a little bit of that bioluminescence to it. Most, if not all, species of firefly eggs will produce it. And so then they become larvae. And this is what the firefly larvae generally look like. Majority of their life cycle, as you'll see in this little infographic, is actually spent in this larval stage. So you can see the eggs hatch in a couple of weeks, and then in this larval stage, they'll spend up to 2 years. So it's a very important stage of their life cycle. And when we move on to talking about how we can conserve fireflies and their species, like really thinking about that larval stage is really important when it comes to conservation efforts. So it's the longest part of their life. They're often referred to as glowworms, although there are other species of beetles that we refer to as glowworms as well. But these glowworms, they don't have wings, they live on the ground, and they're a really important part of the ecosystem because they are active predators. So here's another species of a less common species of a firefly glowworm or firefly larvae. And I just wanted to throw this picture in there because I think it's so unique looking. To me, the larvae kind of resemble trilobites or something similar. And then this one in particular, compared to its body, its head is really elongated and it's really tiny. And I just find them really fascinating to look at. The larvae will typically hunt for their prey in moist soil, marshy areas. Once again, they really rely on that moisture. And then as they find prey, they will actually inject that prey with neurotoxins that paralyze it. And then they'll secrete these digestive enzymes that liquefy the prey, and then they pretty much consume it after that. So sorry, I'm an entomologist. I have to geek out. So think like a fly does. You know, they land on the food, they'll liquefy that food, and then they'll sponge it up. But once again, these have chewing mandibles, but they go through a very similar process. And so going back to roles in the ecosystems, I think it's important to just take a step back and understand how important insects and arthropods are in general in the ecosystem, right? So this first picture are honeybees, obviously. So they have an important role in pollination. We all know that pollination is essential for our survival, right? We need pollination to produce most fruit and vegetables and nearly everything plant-based that we eat, with few exceptions. And honeybees, as an added bonus, they also provide people products, right? So we harvest the honey and we consume it. We can get beeswax from it as well. This second picture is bottleflies that are feeding on a deceased animal. So insects play an important role in decomposition and recycling in the environment as well. So if we didn't have things like flies or beetles that will feed on dead things, we'd have a lot of dead things in the world, right? So we need them. They're essential to recycle things back into the earth. We have predators as part of the ecosystem, like this mantis, and fireflies would also fall into that category. We have species like monarch butterflies and other butterflies and all sorts of different insects that can pollinate plants. This second to last picture, if you're not familiar with what they look like, those are termites. Termites, once again, help recycle carbon back into the earth because they feed on wood and help decompose that wood as well, which is really great out in nature, right? We have fallen trees, we have fallen branches, we can rely on termites to help recycle that. Not so great when they're in our homes, but once again, an important part of the ecosystem. And then we also have what we call keystone species, or key indicators to quality of the environment or quality of the water. And so a lot of times if there's certain species of aquatic insects that are present, like mayflies, for example, it could be an indicator of good water quality. If we have an abundance of mosquito larvae, on the other hand, it could be an indicator that the water quality is poor. And I mention this because we can also think of fireflies through the lens of them being an indicator as well. If we have an ecosystem or a habitat that we're seeing lots and lots of fireflies, that's a really good indicator that that habitat is healthy, especially because they live in these moist, wet areas too. So these firefly larvae or glowworms, they will feed on soft-bodied invertebrates, including slugs and snails and worms primarily. They'll feed on like caterpillars that are on the ground as well. So anything that's really soft-bodied, they'd be able to eat. And so this is kind of what it looks like when the larvae, this is feeding on a slug. And so a lot of people don't connect the dots that firefly larvae are predators. A lot of people don't initially think like, oh, what does a firefly eat, right? We usually associate with them with just having these gorgeous lights, but once again, they're an important part of the environment. So after that larvae stage, they're going to go into the pupal stage, where they undergo this transformation to turn into adults. So they pretty much, just like caterpillars to butterflies, they will reorganize into their adult forms. They'll have wings in most cases. There are some species where the females don't develop wings as adults. Um, but they'll develop wings, they'll be mature enough to reproduce. Um, they typically will overwinter as larvae, some overwinter as pupa. But this overwintering with the pupa occurs in the soil. They'll pupate underground or in rotting logs. Really just finding safe spaces to spend the cold winter. Nebraska winters are kind of unpredictable. Maybe it'll be really cold, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll have a terrible cold snap in spring. But they really rely on this shelter to be able to survive the winter and complete their life cycle. So when we think about conservation efforts, that's another important thing to keep in mind as well. Eventually, the adults will emerge and mate, but you'll notice too, the adults are very short-lived, especially compared to the larvae. They only live 1 to 4 weeks, and so their main mission is to find a mate and to complete that life cycle and make the next generation as well. Some species of fireflies as adults, they won't feed at all. Like I said, their main focus is to find that mate and reproduce. And they'll rely on that energy that's stored from their larval form going into that pupa. Other firefly species will actually feed on nectar or pollen from plants. And maybe in that process, they can inadvertently be pollinators. Probably not the best pollinators compared to bees and butterflies, but we do often see fireflies visit flowers as well. Another important role in the environment and in nature is that they are part of the food chain, part of this food web, right? So they serve as prey for birds, they serve as prey for frogs, they serve as prey for spiders, and then other predatory insects or arthropods as well. And as I was researching fireflies a little bit more, I came across this really interesting video of this frog that has recently eaten a firefly, which is obviously still alive, but just really cool parts of nature that we can see often. Okay. So when we think about fireflies, they are fascinating. They're one of the coolest things. I don't know if you went out as a child or maybe you have children or grandchildren yourself, and it's fun to catch fireflies, right? They're interesting to look at. Maybe you can put them in a jar, and that is all fantastic. But it's also important to recognize that fireflies, they're in decline, honestly. They're in decline. There's a lot of growing evidence of why they're in decline, and there was a research study in 2020 that identified these as the top 3 things that are negatively affecting firefly populations. And so most firefly species and their prey as well, because they need food to eat, once again, they depend on those moist habitats. It could be streams, it could be wetlands, it could be anywhere that retains a lot of moisture. So when we remove these habitats or alter these habitats, we're affecting the fireflies directly, we're affecting their prey species, they no longer have a place to live, and so we're really limiting the amount that we can have in a single space. As a part of this, climate change is an important part of the conversation as well, because changing of the climate can also directly lead to habitat loss as well. And so that's an important thing to keep in consideration too. The second is light pollution. So there's growing evidence out there that light that people produce and people use, whether it's street lights or whether it's leaving your porch lights on during the night, can affect fireflies in their ability to communicate with each other. So once again, they rely on being able to see each other and see their lights to find a mate. But when we're in a big urban city like Lincoln, like I am right now, Lincoln produces a lot of light. If you ever drive here at night or see it in the distance, I think like airplanes, if you've flown on a plane at night, when you know when you're flying over a big city, right? Because you see all this light. But that is negatively affecting because they're unable to find mates when there's so much light pollution in an area. The last is, of course, pesticide use. Pesticides, they have a purpose, right? Oftentimes, maybe we have a vegetable garden and we're growing food, and maybe pesticides are an option that we utilize. There's a lot of people out there that will spray their lawns, maybe for ticks or other areas of their environment. But because it's a pesticide, many of these that will affect a pest species are also going to affect other insect species such as butterflies, fireflies, etc., etc. Larvae and those flightless adult females are particularly vulnerable because they don't have the ability to fly away into new environments. They crawl, they're relatively immobile, and it's difficult for them to disperse. So these are the three primary threats when it comes to firefly populations here in the United States and also throughout the world as well. But understanding these threats is a really good starting point to think about how we can help conserve fireflies. You know, there's a lot of talk about bee conservation and butterfly conservation, especially when it comes to that pollination thing, because we rely on so much. But there's also things that we can do for other species, such as fireflies. So we have this issue of habitat loss, but then we can approach this idea of keeping it wild, is what I like to call it, right? So with pollinators, people put in pollinator gardens. They use native species that we could consider wild to Nebraska, right? And so we can do something similar in maintaining habitat that's suitable for fireflies. So if you have, you know, if you're in a suburban neighborhood and maybe you don't have space for a habitat that looks like this, it could be something as simple as leave the leaves. You know, we recommend that in the early spring for solitary bees in particular, but it also benefits other beneficial insects, including fireflies as well. So you can leave the leaves as it provides habitat and protection for both fireflies and their prey. Plant native species of plants because it helps and encourages water retention in the soil, because once again, those fireflies need that moisture in order to survive. And just avoid disturbing the vegetation. You know, if you're on an acreage, you have a space, maybe you're in a rural part of Nebraska, leave a little bit of space for nature and for the wild, because a lot of species of insects and even beyond that, plants, animals, you name it, really rely on these natural habitats. Firefly.org is a really great organization, and they actually have a lot of recommendations for people that are interested in creating their own little microhabitat for fireflies. So if you're interested in keeping it wild, if you're able, that is a great resource to visit as well. And then when we think about light pollution, this is kind of an easier answer, right? We want to reduce light pollution, and so we want to keep the lights off or dim them if possible. So we can reduce outdoor lighting. Something that could really benefit is using motion sensors or timers. So instead of keeping that light on all night, only have it on when it's needed. Um, Warm colored light bulbs are preferred over cool colored light bulbs. The bluish white tends to, what's the word? Not necessarily confuse, but deter fireflies and make it a little more difficult for them to see each other. And so this is what I'm talking about when we talk about light pollution. If you can't see the stars at night because you're in a big city, right? That's a lot of light pollution. And we think about if we're not able to see something like the stars, you can probably imagine that the fireflies are going to have difficulty seeing each other. So there's a lot of things we can do to do this. Like I said, turn off the outdoor lights at night. If you have your blinds open, maybe you close them if your lights are on inside, and just try to keep that environment as dark as possible. And added bonus is you're conserving energy as well. You're going to have a lower electricity bill. So there's a lot of benefits to reducing this light pollution. And so here are just some examples. So once again, turn off those lights that you aren't using. Limit that outdoor lighting as much as possible. Decorative lighting is another big thing. We think about Christmas time. That bluish white light tends to be more difficult for fireflies. Motion sensors, install timers. You can also shield and aim the lights more carefully. So we can see in this infographic that if we use, shades to shield that light, we're introducing less light pollution into the environment. Switching to that red spectrum if it's possible. And then even like talking to your neighbors sometimes, right? Just be like, hey, light pollution is a thing. I think it's just from like personal experience, I think one of the best ways we can do this is like start with teaching children about things like that, right? And so I'm an entomologist and I want everyone to appreciate insects. And so it kind of starts with that open mind. Yes, people want their lights on. It makes them feel safe and secure, which is great. But we also have to be considerate of other animals and beings that share the environment with us. All right, let's see if we can get here. Perfect. And so once again, pesticides, the literal name of pesticide is to kill pests. Insecticides is to kill insects. So if it's killing a pest insect, there's a good chance it's going to kill other insects as well. And so really the recommendation here is to be thoughtful. I am by no means anti-pesticide. Sometimes pesticides are needed, right? If you have bed bugs in your home, you're not going to get rid of them without pesticides. There are certain pests in the environment that maybe pesticides need to be used to control them because they become such an issue. But we can still use pesticides, but we need to use them in a thoughtful manner. And if you've ever heard myself or any of my colleagues that are in the plant world or the insect world, you've probably heard us talk about this concept that's called integrated pest management. And that's what we recommend to anybody that's dealing with pests, because this tactic uses a variety of tools to control a pest, with chemicals being that last resort, right? So if we use an integrated approach, we're using physical control. So maybe you have a fly issue, like fly swatter is a physical control, and we're not introducing chemicals to the environment. Cultural controls, maybe it's I'm kind of blanking. Like maybe there is food outside that is attracting a lot of pest species. Maybe it's just simply a matter of cleaning it up instead of reaching for that aerosol can to kill things, right? So it's using these different techniques in order to reduce the chemical inputs in the environment that can affect non-target organisms such as bees, butterflies, and fireflies as well. And so when it comes to this integrated approach, it's always important, if you're using this in your lawn or landscape, always important to have something identified. And I say, like, know thy enemy. If you have a pest, you need to know exactly what it is so you know the most effective way to manage it. And maybe the most effective way is to not use pesticides, right? So here we have a lady beetle. This is the multicolored Asian lady beetle many of you might be familiar with. It's an introduced species. It's not native to Nebraska, but we see it as an issue. Then we need to evaluate the situation, right? Is it indoors? Is it outdoors? Are you seeing one? Are you seeing 100? Because if you see 100 lady beetles in your garden bed, is that going to be good or bad? In my opinion, it's great because they're eating aphids and they're part of that environment because they're predators. Many people in Nebraska will also see these lady beetles indoors, especially in the spring, especially in the fall, as they're looking for warmer environments. And so we went from something beneficial outdoors, but now it's indoors, and now it's considered a pest species. So it's really important to kind of evaluate what that situation is. And then once you understand what it is and what the issue is, you can really cater your management plan, right? So lady beetles indoors, you don't even need to grab a pesticide. You can simply vacuum them up. Like that's the easiest thing you can do for the lady beetles. Get some caulk or sealant for outside of the house so you don't have the same issue next year. But once again, we're using this integrated approach and we're not grabbing for that pesticide or insecticide at the first sign of a bug problem. And ultimately, using this approach, we're putting less chemicals in the environment and reducing overall risk, both to ourselves, our families, our pets, but also the natural creatures that surround our homes, right? So, firefly conservation, keep it wild, dim the lights, and be thoughtful about pesticide use. Those are some of the best things that you can do at home. And honestly, like really easy things that we can just practice in our everyday lives, right? Obviously, there's bigger issues out there that are harder to control at the individual level. But if we have more and more people doing this, there's a good chance that we can have these populations bounce back from decline. And so when it comes to fireflies and insects in general, I always encourage observing, respecting, and protecting. I and my family, we go out all the time in nature to look for bugs. Yes, we have nets. Yes, we're capturing them, but we're doing it in a way that we can observe them. We're also being respectful to them, right? We're not squishing them. We're letting them go after we take a look. And all of this is an important part of protecting them because when we understand these species and we know about them and we can appreciate them, then we're protecting them in that sense. Another way to help with firefly conservation is I'm going to bring up iNaturalist again because there are a lot of citizen science projects that people can support research with. So if you're not familiar with citizen science or community science, it's something where we can go out, we can take a picture of a firefly we see, we can upload it to iNaturalist, and then we have a better understanding of, okay, what species are in our area, how many were identified last year compared to this year? Are the numbers bouncing back? Are the numbers declining? So it really helps contribute to that research and contribute to those conservation efforts. I love iNaturalist. I use it for all sorts of bugs. They have a web platform. They have an app too where you can simply upload the pictures, say when you saw it, where you saw it, And then experts will help you identify it. And once again, that contributes to research and conservation efforts. If you're interested in learning more about firefly conservation, Xerces Society is a great resource. I put a link here and a QR code. I'm not directly affiliated with the Xerces Society, but they do some excellent work when it comes to invertebrate conservation, including fireflies. So if you're interested in learning more about these conservation efforts, a little more in depth than what I've shared, this is a really great resource to look into. Um, to date, I believe there are about 17 species of fireflies that are considered at risk, according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature. None of the species that we find in Nebraska are considered at risk, but just because they're not at risk today doesn't mean they're not going to be at risk tomorrow, right? So just really important to try our best to keep nature wild, right? So thank you so much for joining today. I hope you leave with a deeper appreciation for fireflies and maybe feel a little inspired to protect them. If you have any questions, maybe it's about fireflies, maybe it's about other bugs. That's about as far as my expertise goes, but I'd be happy to entertain them. And once again, thank you all so much for attending and listening today.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was awesome. I'm going to launch that survey really quick. And yeah, if you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat or the Q&A section. We'll get those answered for you. I thought of a question really quick for you. Um, if you just have like somebody just has like just their backyard area, is there like a certain amount of the backyard you would suggest to like try to leave? Because I know people want to keep their yards looking nice, but is there like a percentage that people can leave
Ooh.
like leaf or anything like that? Just like a small zone, or how much do you think they would need?
That is a great question. I'm not sure there's an exact number, but in my opinion, like even if you can only do the smallest little bit, like that's better than nothing, right? I often get questions about no mow May, where people just want their grass to grow dandelions and be wild. My house, my husband does not appreciate that. He's a very green lawn type of person. But I also have pollinator habitat, right? So even if I can't do one thing, I can do the other thing. So if you can't have habitat in your backyard, maybe it's just turning off the lights. So even the little things I think can really accumulate and help support. But that's a really great question. Yes. Just occurred to me like May's almost over. Like no mow May is almost over.
I know I was looking at that earlier today. I was like, it's already the 27th. It's almost June.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing. And once again, I just want to say thank you for all that attended. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming out today over lunch breaks if you're working or anything like that. Um, and thank you for filling out that survey. We've got a couple left still out there, so I'll leave that open for a little bit longer. We do really appreciate you guys filling those out for us. And then just as a reminder, in case anyone came in a little bit after we started, this is recorded, so we will put it on our YouTube page within a couple of weeks. So if you will be able to find it there if you wanted to rewatch it, or if you missed any part, or if you want to share it with anyone else. We do have a couple of people just commenting and saying thank you, and it was a very interesting presentation. But looks like we got everyone done with the survey, so I'll end that really quick. Thank you all for filling that out. And if there's no questions on here, I think we can conclude our webinar. So thank you all for coming out and listening to this presentation. Thank you so much, Kait, for spending your time here and providing your expertise on this. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Caitlin, for the invitation. I appreciate it. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day and enjoy some, maybe a little too warm weather, but enjoy being outdoors. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.